Bergen-Fischer Media.
Is it possible to change things? Can I rise above the flood? Will the process cleanse my soul, or is it always in the blood?
Okay, I hate to start off an episode by stumbling and stammering, but you and I were just talking before we started recording about the possibility of revamping the Missionary Position podcast. And instead of me calmly welcoming everybody back to In the Blood, I was tempted to go with It's Friday.
That's good because it's not Friday.
Well, it is when this episode comes out. I mean, we record on Tuesdays, but people don't hear this until Friday. So for us, it's Tuesday morning. For them, it's sometime Friday or beyond.
Happy Friday.
But yeah, welcome everybody back to In the Blood. And I feel this is, God, turning into a really bad habit for me of like completely botching the intro. But instead of injecting any degree of professionalism and starting from scratch, editing this out, I'm just going to leave it be because that's the way we're going now. Did get a little bit of interesting feedback last week. I mean, I was a little bit concerned that me being kind of loopy and it being late night was going to translate poorly into the quality of the conversation. Turns out that people kind of liked you and I taking that looser approach to things.
Oh, cool. So,
And
what was said?
basically, you guys are hilarious, but you're hilarious while covering serious topics, which is a refreshing change from every other podcast I listen to, is what I heard from one listener. Another person had taken our advice, if you want to call it that, and done a Google search on the Missionary Position podcast and started listening to that. And she was absolutely shocked at how different we presented back then compared to now. And I think the way she put it was, I choked on my food while trying to listen to the show because you guys were so funny.
That is excellent. Yeah, we are multifaceted.
But yeah, it's just, I don't know. We're so far removed from that style of podcasting. Just when I read that comment, I was thinking, what? Who? Me? Us? What? Because I don't know. It's been a long time since we've done a comedic podcast.
An unhinged comedic podcast. I thought, yeah. Well, hey, you know what they say? As long as we're pointing our thumbs at ourselves, we're good people.
Okay, so I don't know. Maybe don't give us any feedback telling us you like a certain thing because we're just going to dive into it super, super hard and make you wish you hadn't said something. And here we are several minutes in and we have accomplished nothing. But that changes. My name is AC Bergen-Fischer. With me as usual, as always, as sometimes, as whatever you like to think, is Jason the Dice Man Moore.
Hello, everybody.
Now that you've enjoyed just a little taste of his sweet, dulcet tones, we can get into the conversation of the day. So we were bouncing around a quote by Steven Weinberg, which I was very familiar with, but that you had heard for the first time, and it sort of got us thinking in some kind of way. So before we get into our unpacking of the quote, it probably makes sense to share the quote.
Yeah, good idea.
We got to start doing video because if you saw the look he just shot me, man. Anyways, the quote says something along the lines of, wherever you go, you'll find good people doing good things and bad people doing bad things. But to get good people to do bad things, that takes religion.
One of my favorite topics.
Bad things?
Religion.
Oh.
I'm so Christ-like, you know. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting quote. I like the separation that was deliberately put in that quote. That to be good, you can be good, but to be bad, you have to have religion in there.
Yeah, I don't know. Like for a long time, I really, really thought that in order for a good person to do something truly evil, they would have to have religion in their heart. But recently, I've been second guessing that position. Or maybe not second guessing, but at least just revisiting it.
Mm,
But
I agree with that. I think a lot of the time people come through with these. I don't necessarily think to be evil you have to have religion in your heart, but I think it's easier to be evil with religion in your heart because you can always ask God for forgiveness and it's gone.
right.
It's not part of my past because God forgave it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I mean, just sticking within the context of Weinberg's argument, I think basically he's saying that religion's got the potential to push normally good people to do harmful things in the name of their faith. But he also touches on the idea that both good and bad behavior are part of human nature. And like you said, religion basically can serve as a force to justify these ugly attitudes, actions, behaviors, because they're under the guise of some sort of divine command or religious moral code.
Whereas on a personal level, if you don't have religion and you do something wrong, in most cases, the only thing you can do is have accountability.
Yeah, it's kind of a minefield of a conversation because I mean where I started kind of second guessing things was sometimes when you're watching YouTube it'll just start suggesting videos to you and you could end up down the rabbit hole pretty quickly. I fell asleep and I don't normally believe YouTube on autoplay. I usually have that turned off, but when I'm napping, I like to have a little bit of background noise. So I left the autoplay on. And when I woke up in the middle of a documentary about the role of the SS in Nazi Germany, specifically in the death camps. Yeah. And that little bit of history hit a little bit close to home for me because I don't know how many people know this, but my grandfather actually served in the SS, and I found that a little bit difficult to reconcile in my mind when I first had learned that because I mean I'm not going to pretend the guy was a super awesome grandfather because I mean the guy could be a bit of an asshole sometimes. But he could also be an absolute sweetheart and everything in between. Just like he was a normal person. So imagining him doing these things, it seemed kind of at odds with the idea of a normal person. Now, when you're watching strangers on a documentary, it's really, really easy to say, well, they were evil and that's why they did this stuff. And I'm not saying that that wasn't the case for a lot of them, but I can't I can't commit to the idea that it was the case for all of them. And I certainly can't commit to the idea that it was religion that was motivating these normal people to do these abnormal things. But when I started really digging into it, like thinking, okay, like what would make somebody sign up for this? When you look at the context of when you look at the historical context, we're dealing with a society where people are struggling. They're underemployed. They're underpaid. They're not eating well. They're in the middle of a housing crisis of some kind. And now you've got an opportunity to wear a uniform that commands respect. You've got an opportunity to stabilize your housing situation, earn a good paycheck. And as I was understanding based on this documentary, a lot of these people at this time, they weren't yet aware of what was happening in the camps. They really didn't know. Or at least it could be argued that they didn't know. And I realized that without getting into the ins and outs of trying to justify or not justify whatever the hell happened in the camps, I'm not going to get into that today. I just want to focus solely on the motivation. What makes you put on the uniform? It's not just religion. Yeah, bad stuff happens, but something motivated you there that wasn't religious.
And it's something that we haven't touched on yet, because there's also a fear-mongering conflict. There's a fear-mongering episode to this. There is not wanting to die, because if either with the SS you were with them or you were against them, there was no middle road. So a lot of it could be put on by fear. So with fear being a motivator, again, like you said, it takes out religion, but it also gave a sense of inclusivity in a country that is massively divided. So, everybody wants to feel like they belong. So one side, and I'm just going to put it blunt, I'm not being racist, I'm just going to put it blunt in how they looked at it from what I've read, is either you are Jewish and you're going to be burned, or you are SS and you're going to be reprieved.
Hmm.
What side do you want to be on? In solidarity, a lot of the Jewish brothers said, no, if my brothers are dying, I'm dying. And other people, sometimes some were motivated by, they thought it was right. They thought, oh, yep, white superiority, so on and so forth. But a lot of people, in my opinion, did it out of fear, out of ridicule. They don't want to be in a position where they're going to be ridiculed for the rest of their life.
So using you as an example, you've never been religious. You did start living on the streets at a fairly young age. You were an innocent child when that whole experience started, right? So it could be argued that, because you were an innocent child, you were a good person.
Could be argued, yeah.
Now, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that as part of that experience, that good person, that good little person probably had to do what society would consider to be some bad things just to get by.
I'll openly admit I turned into a not so nice person.
But that wasn't because of religion. I mean, and at some point there was a good little guy doing bad little things, right?
Right.
What are some of the things that motivated you towards either doing bad things or becoming bad things?
Necessity. Stealing became a big part of my life because I had to eat, so I'd go to grocery store, shoplift, buy one thing but have 15 in my coat. Same with clothes. And then you go into a change room with a little bit baggy set of clothes on. You put 4 pairs underneath, and you return 3 that they thought that you took from the rack. They don't suspect because you're putting something back. I don't think I was doing that because I was a bad person. I'm doing that because I wanted to survive.
Right.
Now, on the opposite side of that coin, there's things that I did because I was a bad person, being hired to hurt people, hurting people because I could do it, so I did. Those instances I used religion as an excuse. Oh, you're effing Christian, and this is happening, and that's happening, and yeah, because of you guys, this is what my life is like, and oh yeah, turn the other cheek. You only turn the cheek when you walk by me sitting on the streets, and then I would perpetuate a violent act.
But did you wake up one day a violent person, or was it a progression, or did you hit your breaking point? Like, how did that whole thing play out?
So to be as honest as I can be, I think when I first went on the streets, I was an angry person from a buildup of resentment. Whether or not I was right or wrong, I thought I wasn't wanted. I felt like I wasn't wanted. I felt like I was nothing. I was very angry. And as long as I can remember, I was always very angry, even before I left home. So I cannot consciously say whether or not I was born an angry person or I was turned into one, because I don't remember not being mad. I don't remember not being angry about something. Even at home, Rhonda's the favorite. That's my sister. and I'm not saying any of this is true. This is what I thought when I was younger, not that it's factual. But my sister was the favorite. My mom doesn't care about me. Obviously, my mom always wanted a girl. Rhonda's there. Rhonda's this. Rhonda's that. Well, and like I said, I'm not saying that is true, but that's what my young mind perceived. And I've always been angry because of it until I learned to stop, take a check on myself, and get rid of the crap that didn't really exist, that I put in my own head because of what I was perceiving at the time.
Yeah, I like the way you kind of framed everything. I mean, I can see how things would start snowballing. I mean, an act born out of necessity is the first step towards your whole approach to the world around you changing drastically, and to the outsider, not for the better, right? So I think just that necessity in and of itself is enough to turn this whole argument from Weinberg on its head, that religion is not the sole factor in determining whether a good person will do bad things, right?
Right.
I think, like we already explored, like, certain political ideologies, nationalism, any kind of social movement that you get caught up in could get you to do some pretty ugly stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and one of the common sayings is more man has been killed in the name of God. There's been more bloodshed in the name of God than there has in any other combination of wars ever happening on Earth.
Mm.
So there's arguments for both sides. Because if you're spilling blood in the name of God, well, if God's almighty and God's all loving and God's all this, well, then why is there blood being spilled in the name of religion?
Well, I think it probably ties into this whole idea that, I can't say all religions. I can only say speak to the ones that I've either been involved with or I'm familiar with. Specifically, the monotheistic religions, even more specifically the Abrahamic ones, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. They deal in such strong moral absolutes. And without getting into the weeds of how I would personally define morality, I mean, basically there's a book of stories that people are trying to play out. These stories these books contain not just stories which glorify ugliness, but they've also got rules to follow that would direct you towards certain types of ugliness. And I kind of have a personal problem when it gets into the realm of like moral absolutism, because I'm a person, I think morality is very, very subjective. I don't believe that moral absolutes exist. Some may push back on that. Whatever, we can have a conversation about that at some point. But I think it's especially harmful when you're dealing with a combination of an absolute moral code and believing in your heart that you are executing the will of a God. Very, very strong justification, right?
There's also one point I want to make on this, and it's like a lot of things about religion that I've learned from you or from your influence. So I've researched. And the weirdest thing that I've found about religion is that every religion that has a God, a superior presence, we'll say, okay, has superiorly violent tendencies. I think I said that correctly. So my example for this is the one religion that I know that does not have a supreme being in it is Buddhism.
Hmm.
And that's the only religion I've ever seen that has the morality of peace, love, tranquility. That practices, sorry, let me rephrase that practices peace, love, and Christianity. Any religion that I could think of short of Buddhism has a head, has a person at the top, a supreme being. And in all these religions, there have been wars, there have been bloodshed, there has been astronomical pain caused because of it. Whereas Buddhism has experienced a lot of pain by authorities trying to take territory, to hurt them like they do in Thailand. Acquire from them because they're a peaceful person thinking they're just going to sit down and get railroaded, and a lot of the time they do because they believe in peace. But it shows that when there is a hierarchy, there's a lot more tendency for violence and a mistreating of other people. Does that make sense, or was I just long-winded?
It was a little long-winded, but it did make a good amount of sense to me. Like I'm just thinking, one thing that's sticking out that I feel like I need to like be a bit of a nitpicker and clarify is the way I understand religion to be defined is that you can't have a religion without some sort of supreme being at the head of it, as you described. You know, religion is effectively the belief in and worship of a god or gods following certain tenets, right? Because Buddhism lacks that supreme being, I would put it more in the realm of a school of thought, a philosophy. Now, this is where things get kind of like upside down and backwards. Even if you're going to define Buddhism as a religion, which I'll grant you that, because it does fit pretty much everything except for the having a god. If you look at an example like Tibet, so like in the early 50s, China, which was a secular regime, non-religious, invaded Tibet. The Chinese occupation, the Chinese invasion, they followed a lot of the models that were laid out by religion, even though they weren't operating religiously. And like you'd said, the pacifistic, is that a word? Well, it is now. Basically, that non-combative nature of the Buddhists, where they basically just they peacefully resisted. To this day, they are victims of a cultural genocide.
And that's what I was talking about, Tibet, not Thailand.
Yeah, so it's one of those unique examples of, you know, the religion being on the receiving end of the nastiness rather than perpetrating it.
Mm-hmm. But if we put it into like a religious context like I did earlier, because it fits everything short of the supreme being or beings, it's the only religion that hasn't spilt blood in the name of its creator. And I'll go even further to say it's the only religion that doesn't need to spill blood to show its worth.
Well, I mean, if you're effectively the most important part of your belief system is effectively live and let live, it's really, really hard to use live and let live as a justification to kill and to take and to pillage.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But it does say in the Bible not to judge. The only person that's supposed to be able to judge is your God.
Well, the Bible also says you should be judging constantly, so Bible's full of contradictions. But hey, what do I know?
That was kind of my point, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, really, I think what it comes down to is, you know, one of those things that typically is associated with religion that isn't necessarily a function of, or it's not limited to religion, is this idea, like we were talking about moral absolutism. That idea of moral absolutes, that idea of feeling entitled, that whatever you're using to motivate your aggression, though it most often is religious in nature, it can be non-religious in nature too. I think it's just that inability to bend, that inability to see things through another perspective that allows the ugliness to kind of take hold.
I also think it's very interesting how most people, say, well, how do you know you're a good person if you don't have a God? How do you know you can't be a good person if you don't have a God because you don't have anything to judge against? But you do. You have societal inferences going back to generations, thousands and thousands and thousands of years that says if you do certain acts, you're a good person. If you do certain acts, you're a bad person. And it's not based on religion. It's based on how people treat you. I don't judge. I have no religion. I don't judge what kind of person I am. Other people judge what kind of person I am. I conduct myself as the kind of person I want to be. And I want to be the kind of person that helps people. I want to be the kind of person that turns a loving hand instead of a judging face and turning the other cheek because I didn't like something somebody did. It shows that the quote we're talking about is absolutely 100% incorrect because there's no basis saying that all bad acts are because of people who are carrying a religion of type.
Right. Just sort of, I don't know if it's on topic or off topic, but it's brushing up against the topic, if nothing else. A conversation I've had with numerous religious people over the years is, we get into this idea of objective morality versus subjective morality. If I say I don't believe in an objective moral standard, more often than not, their first pushback is, oh, what does that just mean? You just do whatever you want then. And no, that's not what it means. It means that, like to your point, society has evolved to hold certain things to be good and certain other things to be bad. And that's sort of the standard that we strive to live by. Now, I think where morality comes into play, morality is not just following these rules blindly as the religious do. Morality is determining when the rules should apply and when they justifiably should not apply. Now, I'm not saying that I get it right every time, but I'm typically motivated by pure intention.
Fair enough, yeah. There's a lot that's taken for granted. There's a lot that's put on our plate because, and I'm going to talk specifically about us, but because we're atheists. Because we don't believe in a supreme being. Well, you can be good people because you don't have anything to hang, you don't have anywhere to hang your placard saying, look at me, I'm a Christian. Or look at me, I'm a religious person of whatever faith. We have sticks and stones consistently thrown around, verbal sticks and stones, consistently thrown around, making us a bone of contention rather than an objective choice for morality.
So I find interesting is when you're dealing with, like, especially devoutly religious folk. I'm not talking about the casual churchgoer, but somebody who's like really, really into their holy book. They tend to have this stance where they believe that being a good person and being a moral person means following the rules to a T. And they look at us like we're kind of like rudderless. We're just aimlessly going through life, making choices that feel good and ignoring the consequences, which I don't think is true. What I don't think that these people realize is how much interpretation is going into the application of their beliefs. The same type of interpretation that would go into us unpacking our society's values, right? I mean, if you look at religion, there's the sweet little old granny who goes to church every Sunday. She reads her Bible. She loves Jesus, and she's never done a bad thing in her life. Somebody else could pick up that same Bible, read it just as much as she does, and use it as justification to be the embodiment of pure evil. They're both interpreting that book to mean what they need it to mean. And I think they kind of use it to amplify whatever's already going on inside of them. I do not believe that the holy books necessarily have some magic influence that can turn a good person into a bad one. I mean, just like societal values, like take a simple thing. I mean, like generally speaking, we don't believe that stealing is good. That being said, I mean, if you're hungry, you take the food. Well, have you really stolen or have you just fed yourself? So if you make that choice for yourself and it's a justifiable choice according to how you're applying the rules, if I as an outsider want to be really, really rigid about things, think, well, no, stealing is wrong. I'm calling the cops. That guy shouldn't have stolen that lettuce. Even though technically and generally speaking, stealing is not a good thing, me ratting you out is far worse because you weren't hurting anybody. You were just making sure that you could survive another day.
Now, having been down that road, so I'm going to put up a moral argument. You could have asked somebody to buy it for you. You could have gone in and asked the store if you can work for an hour and get some food. But it depends on the interpretation, the personalized interpretation of morality, on where your morals sit. I don't think the person taking the lettuce is necessarily a bad person. And I don't think in that instance it's a bad action. The person did what they had to do to get something to eat. It's not like they stole a $500 stereo.
Right.
They are trying to survive. And when you wake up in the morning and you go to work and you go to church on Sunday and you thump your Bible or whatever religion you are, you're making a choice. When you see that street person sitting there begging for money because they don't have a pot to piss in and you turn your nose up at them, you're making a choice. For you, that's correct to do. For me, it's not. I offer to take the person to buy him something to eat. There's personal morality, and like you said, it's very subjective. It's entitlement of the individual. If you want to be a criminal, then that's your prerogative. You can be a criminal. You can fight the law. Nothing says you can't. Is what you're doing against the law in common society? Yes, it is. You want to be a criminal because you think you can make more money that way? It's not for me to judge you.
So long story short, I mean, whether you're religious or not religious, I don't care who you are or what walk of life you come from. There is some amount of interpretive dance going on as far as how you're navigating the moral standards, whether they be subjective, objective. You are interpreting it on the fly every moment of every day. And if you say you're not, well, you're lying both to us and probably to yourself. Okay, so taking things back to the quote at the beginning, and I think you've already more or less alluded to what your answer to this question is going to be, but do you think that Weinberg's argument is overly simplified?
No, I think it's wrong. But you can change categorically whether something is a degree of wrong. In this case, I think that generalization is just wrong. I don't think there's any grade of it. It's wrong to put that into somebody because there are people who believe what he said, but there's also people who practice different.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you too. I at the beginning of this conversation, I was honestly thinking, well, I think the comment that he made actually was, yeah, wrong, but wrong-ish because it was overly simplified. But having gone through the conversation now, I'm landing more in the case of like, no, he was like not even slightly correct. And it wasn't a case of oversimplification. It was a case of, well, maybe it was oversimplification in the sense that he made a binding blanket statement. And I don't believe that any of these statements apply objectively 100% of the time. Even like for a stupid example, it could be argued that I'm always going to be Tony no matter what. And I think a lot of people are going to agree with that. But then I will say, okay, well, But you don't know me as Tony. You know me as AC because that's how I identify on the podcast. Maybe from their perspective, I'm always AC. What happens now if I go to another country where they don't pronounce my name the same way? Like when I was in South America, nobody called me Tony. Nobody called me AC. They called me Antonio. And to them, I was always Antonio. What would your name be in a country that doesn't have a J sound? You're not always going to be Jason.
Well, they'll probably call me asshole.
But like, this is just an overly complex way of saying that, you know, things are going to move. They're going to shake sometimes. And when we bind ourselves to these always scenarios, here's some irony for you. When we bind ourselves to these always scenarios, we are always going to be wrong.
That is beautiful play on words. Well done. Very well done.
Okay, so any closing thoughts before we wrap things up here?
When you're doing something, take the time to look at your morality. Don't go by a book, and I'm not saying don't be religious. I'm saying go by what you feel. Do what you think is right. Don't let other people push their agenda so you make your situation by their influence. Don't read a quote and say, oh, yeah, that's me. That's a facet of you. Allow yourself to be larger than one thing. And don't put stock in everybody else's beliefs. Put stock in what you believe by doing your own research, not just because somebody told you to be.
Nice. Okay, and I'm going to make a minor adjustment on the way I usually cap things off here. I'm going to say, when you have thoughts on this or anything else we've spoken about, either on this podcast or any other, please do not hesitate to email us inthebloodpod@gmail.com. And as always, my friends, until next time, much love. Gotcha this time, Jason.